This race potentially asked some intriguing questions along the lines of, could Ferrari, who found themselves on the pole with Charles Leclerc, win a race? Could Sergio Perez take advantage of the 5-place grid penalty given to Max Verstappen for him to win a race again? Could McLaren continue to apply the pressure on Red Bull? Lots of other stuff to talk about as well, but these were the key issues going into the Belgian Grand Prix. But as it happened, it was another clinical masterclass by Max Verstappen to win the Belgian Grand Prix, going away to win it in style with his team on the radio, asking him to take it easy in that final stint on a new set of soft Pirellis, and Max taking it easy, but in the pit lane, it still looked as if he was thrashing the tyres. We'll get into that in a minute. It didn't get very far for McLaren because Oscar Piastri made a pretty good start, was down the inside going into La Source, as you do, absolutely kept in a straight line. Carlos Sainz on the left in the Ferrari braked a little bit late, locked up, got a little bit out of control, and the two touched. Oscar on the inside wall and the Ferrari. The Ferrari got damaged, which eventually caused Carlos's retirement after he'd spent 2/3 of the race holding everybody up, and Oscar an immediate retirement. So that was not good. Interestingly, given the number of penalties that are given and the number of warnings or whatever that are given by the stewards these days, there was no action taken at all on this incident. I presume they just thought it was a start line, first corner accident. To my mind, it was definitely Carlos Sainz's fault. He definitely came in on Oscar Piastri, who was alongside him, if not ahead. And as Oscar said on the radio, it was as if he didn't even know that I was there. Having said all of that, Oscar is, of course, a rookie. And other drivers, more seasoned drivers, probably would have read the body language of Sainz and then backed away and given him that corner to avoid the first corner shunt, to avoid the first corner elimination from the Grand Prix. It would have meant forsaking space, of course, but that's probably what a more seasoned driver would have done, with Carlos kind of out of control at that moment. Reminds me a little bit of the Romain Grosjean, Fernando Alonso thing. And I think Oscar in this situation did have the prerogative to give Sainz room. Having said that, I think it was Sainz's fault that he just cut straight into him. So anyway, they were both effectively out. So that neutralised that challenge, because Lando Norris was nowhere on the opening lap. Very, very slow on the medium tyre in which he started. They put him on the hard, he was even worse. And then on the soft, he recovered well to get back into the points. But it was not a good day for McLaren. So end of story for McLaren, in effect. Ferrari, Charles Leclerc, yeah, he did lead out of La Source, nice clean start. He did lead down the hill. He did lead out of Eau Rouge. But before they got to Les Combes, it was Sergio Perez blasting past in the Red Bull RB19B to take the lead. And you would have thought at that point to go on to win the Belgian Grand Prix, but of course that was not the case. He was nothing like as good as Max, and I've been talking about it all weekend. Through Sector 2, that was where it all came down to a Max Verstappen Masterclass, in my view. And just after they'd both stopped for medium tyres in first third of the race, Max 1 lap later than Perez. He just blasted past Perez in the same way that Checo had done to Charles Leclerc. This was an opportunity for Perez to win a Grand Prix again. And yes, you could say back on the podium, good drive, but blown away by Max Verstappen in a really good racing car. Charles Leclerc did a very good job in the latter stages of the race when he was saving fuel, still to hold a margin over Lewis Hamilton, who also drove really well in the Mercedes. There was not a lot between them, and in the end I think it came down to track position and Charles making no mistakes. And that was the race in a nutshell. Max Verstappen stayed out of trouble through La Source, but in doing so actually gained positions. He stayed on the outside, let everybody have the schmozzle on the inside, and was picking up places. And by the time they got to the end of lap 1, all he had to do was pass Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, and he was up there behind Sergio Perez. So very, very good opening phase of the race for Max. Now let's talk about the most fascinating part of the race, I thought, which was the last phase of the race when everybody was back on the soft tyre. It was soft, medium, soft, the winning strategy. Everyone was back on the soft tyre, new sets of soft, and they were pretty much about the same age. Max came in last, and he had 1 lap advantage over Sergio Perez, who had 1 lap advantage over Charles Leclerc, who had 1 lap advantage over Lewis Hamilton. And on Max's first lap on that new set of softs in the last phase of the race, he hadn't lost the lead in getting them. He'd been leading by 9.7 seconds at that stage on the medium tyre. Max set fastest lap was a 48.9. And at that point, Giampiero Lambiase, his race engineer, got onto the radio and said, Max, use your brain. We had Deg on the soft tyre in the first phase of the race, on full tanks admittedly. You've got to look after the tyres. And Max then did. He responded to that. He responded to that by consistently going a tenth, 2/10 slower than Perez, Leclerc and Lewis through sectors 1 and 3. And sector 1, by Pirelli's own admission, is about the hardest sector on any racetrack of the world on tyres, because of the speed through Eau Rouge and because the G-forces there are not only lateral but also vertical, which is really hard for the tyre. Formula One tyres not generally built for high vertical G. So that was that if anything was going to cane the tyres, it was going to be there. And potentially sector 3 a little bit, but everybody was much of a muchness there. There's not much a Max Verstappen can do in a sector 3 that's going to be a lot different from a Sergio Perez. You're going to get the tiny details going through the last chicane, as I mentioned yesterday, but in terms of overloading the tyres or not, there's not a lot of difference between what Max would do through there and what Perez would do. It was all sector 2. That was where the tyres work the way Max Verstappen maximises the use of the tyres. And I thought it was fascinating. Having got that reprimand from Giampiero, how Max then responded to that. He made a bit of a joke about, oh, well, you know, I can push the tyres a bit and do a bit more pit stop practice. And no, thank you, Max, that's not going to happen. But obviously that was tongue-in-cheek. And there was another factor as well. Through sectors 1 and 3, the wind had got up. And Max was quite prone, and all the drivers were prone to crosswinds, particularly through Eau Rouge. So if you're leading the race and you've got a margin, what are you going to do? You're going to back off through there. You're going to give yourself lots of margin, particularly as when in the semi-wet, Max had a bit of a moment through Eau Rouge as well. The back end had got out of line. A few drivers had the similar moments, and he had to use a bit more apex curb at the top of the hill than he would have wanted. So there was all of that. And if Max was going to look after the tyres, he was going to do it in sectors 1 and 3. He was going to back right away. But in sector 2, he was just going to drive it normally. And that's what I found so fascinating, because here's Max in a mode where he's looking after the tyres, he's looking after the deg, and sector 2 is a sector that really rewards the way he drives, with his short corners, with his touch, with his feel, with his supple inputs, with his lovely transitions from the straight into lateral load. Lots of corners there where he can display that talent. And so I've done a snapshot of that phase of the race. They're all on their new sets of soft tyres now. They're conserving tyres. There's crosswind in sectors 1 and 3. Max is consistently 1 to 2/10 slower than Perez and Charles, and sometimes Lewis in sectors 1 and 3. Lewis is actually quite quick through sector 1, as it happens. But here's what's going on in sector 2 with Max in conservation mode, looking after the tyres, not overloading them at all. And here's what he's doing between laps 32, when the tyres were new and he set fastest lap, and lap 44, the end of the race. Look at that, 47.0, 47.9. How many laps in 47? Let's just count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 11 laps in the 47s. Sergio Perez does no laps in the 47s. Charles Leclerc does no laps in the 47s. And nor does Lewis Hamilton, until he puts on right at the end that new set of mediums. Interesting, he put the mediums on. Maybe I should be apologising to Lance Stroll. Maybe the medium was quicker than the soft around Spa. I presume they didn't have any new sets of softs left, and that's why it was the new medium. And then you see Lewis on that new set of mediums right at the end, empty fuel, 46.4, which is 0.6 quicker than Max's best 47 when he still had fuel on board. And as I say, he was still trying to be relatively conservative, even though he got fastest lap at that point. And I think, we don't really need to make allowance for the age of the tyres, because as you can see, there's only 1, 2, 3 laps in it. Okay, Spa's quite a long lap, so you could argue that Lewis's tyres in that last stint from laps 32 to 44 were not as healthy as Max's. Yeah, 3 laps probably counts for a bit. But even so, let's compare just between Max and Sergio Perez. If Sergio Perez is going into the August break now thinking, yeah, I'm back there on the podium, the momentum's going, he needs to look at what's going on at sector 2, and he needs to think about why he's so much slower than Max Verstappen through there, even though in sectors 1 and 3 he's quite regularly quicker than Max. And I keep saying that because this is an indication that Max actually wasn't trying that hard through sector 2. So look at that, 47 on the same lap. Perez 48.5. It was still a little bit drizzly there, admittedly. 47.9. Okay, Max has got the best out of the tyres. He's had that one lap when they're brand new. Perez 48.7, 48.0, 48.3. Okay, 3/10. You're thinking, oh yeah, he's dancing with the music now. Next lap, he's 7/10 slower, and so it goes on. Sometimes he's a second a lap slower just through sector 2. And sector 2 is all about les comms, change of direction, quite slippery there, and you've really got to do a good job with the steering mid-corner to get the diagonal exits, not to have too much load going through the car when you're doing that change of direction. Then it's that next right-hander where you've got to be really, really careful because it's very slippery on exit there, and you've got to get the steering input absolutely perfect. You can't have any jolts in the car. Then you've got that long, I call it the long, boring, annoying downhill right-hander at the bottom of the hill there, or going downhill anyway, which is all about massaging understeer and feeling the grip, because that corner can get worse as the race goes on, or conversely it may get better if the light rain is easing. You've got to be able to feel the grip there, which Max does incredibly well. But much more importantly, you've got to be able to live with understeer, and you've got to control the releasing brake pedal pressure against increased steering load. And that's what Max does absolutely brilliantly. He's superb in that area. And that's where Perez is not superb. And at one point he was talking about, the traction's going away. This is admittedly, I think it was in the medium stint, the middle phase of the race. And when Perez says the traction's going away, that's effectively saying, I've lost everything, because traction is what Perez is all about, as I keep saying. So he would have lost confidence on that. And then you're going into that next left-hander where Lance Stroll crashed yesterday when he was on the medium slicks. And that's a very, very edgy corner as well, because it's downhill, it's negative camber, if you like, downhill camber anyway. Quite a slippery exit curve there as well. And that, again, is all about the way you get the car into the corner. It's nothing to do with traction out of that corner. It's all to do with the balance and the feel you have through the steering going in there, and the transition you make coming out of the previous left, how much of a load you're putting on the car on the left and then on the right, how you minimize that. And again, that is what Max Verstappen is all about. It's all about feeling that perfect moment when he knows he can just change direction of the car. Lewis too, and I think that's why Lewis, relatively speaking, given the shortcomings of the Mercedes, and they were not running a lot of wing, as we've seen over the weekend, that's why he was relatively good as well, compared with, I don't know, Sergio Perez for sure. I think he and Charles pretty much of a muchness. Both of them really good through there. And the point is, actually, you've got the three great short corner drivers in Formula One, Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton, all looking really good through Sector 2, Ferrari and Mercedes shortcomings notwithstanding. And then you go down to Pouhon, that downhill run. And that's all about the initial transition from straight line into the way you get the steering load in there, and the way you then load up the car, how you shorten the corner going in, and how you get the car as straight as possible as soon as possible for a really, really clean exit. Again, that's absolutely Max Verstappen. That is his territory. And again, this is a corner classically where Perez will always lean on the rear, just have a slightly later apex, geometrical apex probably, and will be loading the car up more coming out of there. Definitely be carrying more load for longer corner. And then down into the Stavolo S section of road, which is where Perez wouldn't be in such a big disadvantage, because there's not that much that Max can do there, but you can be sure he's doing it with his change of direction and the way he's just finding the perfect moment to get the car going the other way, and doing it beautifully, softly as well. And then he's getting the benefit of all that on the beginning of that straight up the hill. So that's where it was all happening. And Max, I thought, reading between the lines, what was going on there was that Jim Perro was saying, Max, slow down, you're caning the tyres too much, putting too much energy into them. And Max actually is smiling to himself, because he's actually not doing that. He's looking after the tyres like crazy through sectors 1 and 3, which is, where you're going to abuse the tyres if you're really going to abuse them. And through sector 2, he's just driving beautifully, not putting too much pressure on the car. And he's sometimes a second of that quicker than everybody else, just with that one sector, because it's the Max Verstappen sector. And I thought that was the absolute centre of the race of what this Grand Prix was all about. And that's why Max was able to do what he did today, and how he had that momentum all the time, because he just had so much in hand. And because he was looking after the tyres so well, obviously when he needed to do a pass or whatever, he could do that beautifully under braking into La Source, and then again out of Eau Rouge, on the momentum run out of Eau Rouge. Good luck to Lewis going into the summer break. Not sure Mercedes have any of the answers they really need in terms of what they're going to be doing with the car. And its performance still on a full fuel load, a big question mark, as we saw in Hungary and to some extent here at Spa. I was talking to Scarbs the other day about why he thought that might be. coming under the heading of tyre management and everything else. And he came up with a really, really interesting solution. It's so obvious that Mercedes probably haven't even looked at it. So that'll be something I'll discuss with Scarbs over the August break as we go into that period, and we'll do a video there of chatting about that, about what is this really obvious thing that Mercedes perhaps have overlooked. Fernando Alonso drove pretty well in the Aston Martin to come through on a different tyre strategy and to get some reasonable points for the team again, to kind of keep things more or less on the straight and narrow. But as I say, right now his job is to try to make sure that Aston Martin remain very much the Fernando Alonso show, and that's not going to be an easy ask over the second half of 2023. Lance Stroll, not too bad today, did pretty well. Again, he too on a very different strategy, but bringing the car home, had some good racing there with George Russell. George got the better of him, but nonetheless, Lance had a good day. Alpine had Esteban Ocon in the points on this occasion, Pierre Gasly not, after a good podium finish yesterday in the sprint. Both cars finished. That's quite good news from Alpine's point of view. But I think it's a very unsettling weekend for us observers, because good people are now leaving that team for no reason that I can see. Otmar and Alain Permain, two good racers who know what they're doing. And also Pat Fry leaving Alpine to go to Williams now. Talk about Mattia Binotto coming into Alpine, after his stint at Ferrari. But what we saw here at Spa, pretty good weekend for Alpine at P3 and the other car in the points in the race, was very much the era of Otmar and Alain Permain. So for those two guys to be going now, it just doesn't seem right, and that's an unsettling feeling to be taking into the August break. And Yuki Tsunoda was the final point scorer in the AlphaTauri, having had a pretty poor qualifying and sprint. He got into the points today, starting on the medium tyre as distinct from the soft, which was the tyre on which Daniel Ricciardo started on. And Daniel not looking quite as impressive today, but nonetheless, good to have him back in Formula One. So we go into the August break now with Red Bull just absolutely unstoppable with Max Verstappen. And we saw a little cameo today, I think, big cameo around the big Spa circuit in that Sector 2, where he was just sublime. There's no other word to describe his driving through there and the way he used that sector and what he's so good at doing in a racing car to win the Belgian Grand Prix and leave lots of margin in sectors 1 and 3, which are the margins that can cause you trouble around Spa. It was just fabulous to watch, and a good way to go into the August break. I'll still be doing quite a lot of videos during the break. I'll be doing live streams as well, so stick with it. In the meantime, have a good time if you're going away. And a big thanks to our two partners, to Jetcraft and to Pitbox.io. Thank you too for watching. See you soon.